Here's a typical desktop PC from the early 1990s. Okay, maybe a microchannel IBM PS2 wasn't so typical, but let's not get hung up on specifics. I'm just using it as an example. It's your basic beige box with a 14-inch CRT monitor, running DOS, and you can go into your favorite version of Windows ever, version 3.1. And the point is, as long as it's turned on, it's turned on. And it's going to be drawing pretty much the same amount of power. Even if you have a screensaver running, which may help prevent the phosphor from getting burned in on the monitor, but that won't help you save that much power because no matter what's being displayed on the picture tube, you still have a flyback transformer in there generating about 25,000 volts and 3 electron guns scanning across the face of the CRT, drawing the red, green, and blue pixels. And this is just how life was in the era before Energy Star and automatic power management. If you wanted to save a bit of power, you had to manually turn off the monitor and ideally turn off the entire computer when you're not using it. And as for how much power it's using, the system unit itself draws about 55 watts from the AC line. And that doesn't matter what it's doing, regardless if it's just sitting at the DOS prompt doing nothing or running a CPU speed benchmark. It never varies more than a few watts. Although surprisingly, even though this has a hard power switch, so you'd think when I turn it off it wouldn't be drawing any power, it's still drawing about 5 to 6 watts when it's turned off. And when it's set to near maximum brightness and displaying a text document in Windows with a nearly all-white background, the monitor draws about 52 watts. And when the screensaver kicks in, that does drop down to about 39 watts. So this type of screensaver does save a little bit of energy just based on the fact that more of the screen is black than it normally is when you're using the computer. But it's still drawing about as much power as leaving on a 40-watt incandescent light bulb. That's where this device comes in, the Monitor Mizer. It was introduced in August 1993 by a company called Technology Marketing Partners. It had a list price of $79.95. This is the PC version. They also planned for a Macintosh version, which was going to be introduced in October 1993. And as you can see, this one is still brand new. It has all the original plastic wrapping because I got this one back in October 2020 from an electronic surplus company called Altronix. I paid $6.95 for it. Unfortunately, they don't have any more of these left. And it's this box, a little bit larger than a mouse, and it plugs into the wall. And then you plug this into your monitor. Then you plug this into your computer's keyboard port. It's for the old AT style 5-pin DIN keyboard connector, but it can also be adapted to PS2. Then you plug your keyboard into the port on the Monitor Mizer itself. Let me unwrap all of this and then I'll show you how it works. I love coiled keyboard cables. I was sad when they disappeared in the mid-90s. And of course I have to get this on camera, removing this plastic film. There's another piece of plastic film on this side, but as I'm picking away at it, it's only coming off in little pieces, so I'm just going to leave it on. You've probably already guessed how the Monitor Mizer works, but it checks for keyboard activity, and if a certain amount of time has passed without you typing anything on the keyboard, it shuts off the power going to your monitor to save energy. And with these dip switches, you can set that delay time before it shuts off your monitor between 10 and 42 minutes. The strange thing is, I just peeled off the shrink wrap as you saw, so I've never touched these switches. This is the way it came from the factory. It's set with switch 4 on and 1 through 3 off. But according to this chart, That's not a valid setting. So I don't know if this means it's going to stay on continuously, but either way, I'll need to change these dip switches to one of these settings before I can use it. I'll pick 10 minutes, so switch 1 needs to be on and 2, 3, and 4 need to be off. So I'll move switch 4 off and switch 1 on. And now it's set for 10 minutes. Because I'll be using the Monitor Mizer with the PS2, I'll need to add a couple of adapters. Now it's possible if you bought the original retail version of this, it came with these adapters, but I did not get this in the original packaging. So I have these adapters here to convert the old 5-pin DIN to PS2. So this would plug into the back of the computer, and then this one would plug directly into the Monitor Mizer, and this is what you would plug the keyboard into. Now the Monitor Mizer is all hooked up, resulting in quite a bit of cable spaghetti, and luckily this monitor accepts an IEC power cord, because some monitors had a permanently attached power cord, which would require yet another adapter in order to use the Monitor Mizer. The computer is now turned on with the Monitor Mizer installed, and to simulate a typical use case back in the day, I have my spreadsheet loaded into Lotus 123, and I'm going to walk away for 10 minutes while I have my coffee break and see if the Monitor Mizer shuts off the monitor. It works. So I'm going to press the letter G and the monitor turns on. But as you can see, it did enter the letter G into Lotus 123, so it did accept that key press and pass it on to the computer. So when you're waking this thing up, you should press a non-printing key like one of the shift or control keys. But one unadvertised feature is that because the Monitor Mizer runs on 5 volts from the keyboard port, that means as soon as you shut off the computer, it also cuts off power going to the monitor. So you don't need to separately turn off and on the monitor. It will now be controlled by the computer's main power button. So the Monitor Mizer works great in DOS applications, which were primarily keyboard based, but by the time it was released in 1993, Windows was becoming increasingly popular, and in a graphical user interface like Windows, there easily can be situations in which you're spending minutes at a time interacting with the computer slowly through the mouse and not touching the keyboard, and I'm sure you can see the problem with that. Hey! Well, now you know why most of these ended up sitting in a warehouse for 25 years until they were sold off as electronic surplus. The Monitor Mizer was a good idea about 5 years too late. In 1995, they introduced an updated version of the Monitor Mizer called the Monitor Mizer Plus, which checked for mouse activity as well as keyboard activity before shutting off the monitor. But again, they were late to the game because by 1995, virtually all new computers and monitors were Energy Star compliant and included built-in power-saving features, thereby rendering the Monitor Mizer redundant. I'm sure you want to see what's inside the Monitor Mizer, so here it is. I bet if somebody made this thing today, they would just stick in a Raspberry Pi, but of course there was no such thing as that 30 years ago, so it has 5 ICs to do all the timing and keyboard activity detection. There's also a 10 amp relay, which you may have heard click when it turned the monitor off and then back on, as well as a 5 amp fuse, and that looks like a metal oxide varistor for some surge protection. Overall, it looks like a well-engineered, high-quality product, but unfortunately, one that missed the mark.